Hello, my name is Ezra Kane, 33 years old. I am a civil lawyer living in Chicago, where skyscrapers reflect cold sunlight onto the surface of Lake Michigan. This city is always bustling, like a machine that never stops moving, with streets filled with dust and the endless sound of car horns. My office is on the 23rd floor of a high-rise, where I spend 12 hours a day analyzing contracts, litigating, and trying to keep my mind from being swept away by the whirlwind of work. Chicago is not my hometown, but it's the place I chose to build my career, to prove that I can stand firm in a world where every mistake comes at a steep price. It was a Wednesday, the sky gray and overcast with a light drizzle that seemed to tease. I was preparing for the biggest trial of my career, a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit involving a land dispute between a real estate corporation and a group of local residents. Files were piled high on my desk, sticky notes plastered across my computer screen, and my third cup of coffee had long gone cold. I had been working on this case for 3 months straight, barely sleeping more than 4 hours a night. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was my chance to make a name for myself, to climb another rung on the career ladder. My colleague, Sarah, even joked that if I won this case, I could retire early at 40. But I wasn't thinking about retirement. I just wanted to win. My phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting my train of thought. I glanced at the screen. A strange number, an unfamiliar area code. I was about to ignore it, but something urged me to pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky, carrying a gravity that made my heart clench. "Mr. Ezra Kane, this is Dr. Levine from St. Mary's Hospital in Savannah. I'm calling about your grandmother, Joanne Kane. She's had a stroke and is currently in the ICU. Her condition is very serious. Can you come right away?" The world around me seemed to stop. The sound of rain hitting the window, Sarah's typing at the desk next to me, the ticking of the clock on the wall, all of it faded, as if someone had unplugged reality. My grandmother. The woman who raised me through childhood summers, who taught me how to tie my shoes, who told me stories about old sailing ships while brewing tea on her porch. My grandmother, the only person in my family who never turned her back on me no matter what mistakes I made. Stroke, coma, ICU. Those words stabbed into my chest like knives. I don't remember how I responded to the doctor, only that when I hung up, my hand was shaking so badly I dropped my coffee cup onto the floor. Sarah looked up, concerned. "Ezra, are you okay? You look like you've just seen a ghost." "My grandmother," I whispered, my voice breaking. "She's in the hospital. A stroke. I have to go." Sarah stood up immediately, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Go. I'll handle the case. If you need anything, just let me know." I didn't have time to thank her. All I could think about was my grandmother, her silver hair, her kind eyes, and the smile that always made me feel safe. I couldn't let her be alone. I couldn't. I called my boss, Richard, a stern man with eyes sharp as knives. When I told him I needed to postpone the case to go to Savannah, his voice was icy over the phone. "Ezra, you know how important this case is. If you leave now, we could lose the contract. Are you sure?" I gripped the phone tightly, trying to stay calm. "Sir, this is family. I have to go. I'll be back as soon as I can." A long silence followed. Then he sighed. "Fine. But don't make me find another lawyer, Ezra. You have 48 hours. I didn't care about his warning. 48 hours or 48 seconds, I couldn't leave my grandmother alone in a hospital. I booked the earliest flight, a 6 a.m. departure the next morning, then rushed back to my apartment to pack. That night, I didn't sleep. Images of my grandmother filled every corner of my memory. Her sitting by the fireplace, teaching me chess. Her laughing loudly when I spilled a tray of cookies on the floor. Her holding me close when I cried after being scolded by my father. She was my true home, not the cold apartment in Chicago or the old house in Savannah I had left behind long ago. The next morning, O'Hare Airport was packed, but I barely noticed anyone. I sat hunched in the waiting area, clutching my phone, constantly checking for updates from the hospital. There were none. Every minute felt like a century. When the plane took off, I looked out the window, watching Chicago shrink below me. I told myself, as long as she's okay, nothing else matters. The flight lasted 3 hours, but it felt like 3 days. When the plane landed in Savannah, the July heat hit me like a stifling embrace. I took a taxi straight to St. Mary's Hospital, not stopping to eat or rest. Only one question echoed in my mind. Would she wake up? Would she recognize me? St. Mary's Hospital sat on the outskirts, a low building with white walls and the sharp smell of antiseptic. I practically ran through the hallways, my shoes pounding the floor, until I reached the ICU. A nurse led me in, her voice gentle but unable to mask the gravity of the situation. She's in here. Her condition is stable, but she hasn't woken up. When the door to the room opened, I felt my heart shatter. My grandmother lay there on a stark white bed, surrounded by tubes and machines beeping steadily. Her silver hair spilled across the pillow, her face pale, her eyes closed. No smile, no kind gaze, just a terrifying stillness. And what shocked me even more, no one else was there. Not my father, not my mother, not my sister, just me. I sat down in the chair beside her bed, taking her frail hand in mine. That hand had once been so strong, lifting me when I fell, wiping away my tears. Now it was cold, weak, as if it might crumble if I held it too tightly. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice choking. "It's me. I'm here. Don't be afraid, I'm not going anywhere." I sat there for hours, never taking my eyes off her. Nurses came in to check on her a few times, but I barely heard what they said. I just wanted her to open her eyes, to hear her call my name like she did when I was a child. But she remained still, as if floating somewhere in a dream I couldn't reach. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called my father, Martin Kane. He answered after the third ring, his voice cheerful, as if he were at a party. "Ezra, what's up? I'm busy here." "Dad," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, though anger simmered in my chest. "Grandma had a stroke. She's in the ICU in Savannah. Did you know?" Silence. Then he responded, his tone nonchalant. "Oh yeah, we heard from the doctor, but we're in Florida on vacation with your mom and Talia. Everything's already paid for, non-refundable." I felt the blood rush to my head. "What are you saying? Grandma's in a coma, Dad. You can't come?" "Ezra, calm down," he interrupted, his voice growing irritated. "She's fine. The doctor said so. Besides, you're there, aren't you? Take care of her for a few days. We'll visit when we're back." I wanted to scream, to ask how he could be so callous, but I just clenched my jaw and said, "Fine. I'll handle it." Then I hung up, not wanting to hear another word. I looked at my grandmother, still motionless on the bed. Out there, my parents and sister were swimming in the ocean, eating seafood, laughing under the Florida sun. And here I was, sitting in a cold room, holding the hand of the most important person in my life, praying for her to wake up. I told myself, as long as she's okay, I'll do anything to protect her. The days that followed passed in a suffocating loop. I became part of the ICU room, where the smell of antiseptic mingled with the steady beeping of machines. I didn't leave the hospital except for brief moments to grab a sandwich or a cup of coffee from the vending machine. Sleep came in short fragments when I slumped over in the plastic chair beside my grandmother's bed, my mind exhausted but unable to stop thinking about her. Each time a nurse walked in, I startled, hoping they'd bring good news, but the answer was always the same. "Her condition is stable, but she hasn't woken up." Stable. The word sounded like hollow comfort when she was still lying there, eyes closed, as if trapped in a world I couldn't reach. I called my parents every day, reporting every small detail about her condition. I told them about her oxygen levels, about how her finger twitched once, about the doctor saying there was slight improvement in her brain waves. I hoped the information would change their minds, would make them jump on the next flight back. But every call brought the same short, perfunctory responses. "Good, keep us updated, Ezra," my mother said, her voice gentle but distant, as if my grandmother were just a task to be handled, not the mother who gave birth to my mother's husband. Talia, my sister, didn't even bother picking up. She just texted, "Busy having fun, bro. Say hi to Grandma for me." Then I saw the photos. One morning, as I sat by my grandmother's side trying to read aloud a chapter from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the book she used to read to me when I was a child, my phone buzzed. I opened the X app, scrolling through the timeline to pass the time. That's when I saw Talia's post, a photo of the whole family, my father, mother, and her, standing on a beach wearing palm tree-printed t-shirts, grinning from ear to ear. Behind them was a sparkling blue ocean and a table laden with lobster, crab, and vibrant orange cocktails. Talia's caption read, "Florida paradise. Family is everything. Summer vibes. Tarn loved the beach." It felt like a punch to the chest. Family is everything? What about Grandma lying here fighting for every breath? I zoomed in on the photo, staring at my father's smug smile, the one I'd seen 1,000 times, the one he used to charm strangers. My mother was holding up a cocktail, her eyes sparkling in the sunlight. Talia, my 24-year-old sister, was in a bikini, posing like she was in a travel ad. None of them looked like they remembered Grandma. None of them looked like they cared. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the chair, a mix of anger and helplessness churning in my chest. I wanted to scream, to call them back and ask how they could be so heartless. But I didn't. I looked at my grandmother, her frail hand still in mine, and told myself, "It's okay, Grandma. I'm here. I don't need them." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to push the anger down. I didn't want her to sense the chaos in me, even in her coma. I wanted her to feel only peace. I started reading to her every day. I brought her copy of Huckleberry Finn from her house, an old book with yellowed pages, its musty smell bringing back summer afternoons when I was 8, sitting on her porch in Savannah. I read slowly, emphasizing each sentence, hoping my voice could pull her back. "Grandma, do you remember this part?" I said, my voice trembling. "The part where Huck and Jim float down the Mississippi. You used to tell me the river was like life, always flowing, but somehow it takes you where you need to go." I didn't know if she could hear me, but I kept reading. I told her about my life in Chicago, about the cases I'd won, about the cold coffee on my desk. I shared silly stories too, like the time I burned my kitchen trying to cook pasta, or when I almost fell asleep in a meeting. I wanted her to know I was still her Ezra, the kid who spilled cookie trays and got fake scolded before she pulled me into a hug. There were moments when I thought she could hear me. Once, while I was reading about Huck talking about freedom, her finger twitched in my hand. I stopped, my heart pounding, staring at her hand, waiting. But nothing more came. Just a small movement, probably a reflex. I told myself not to hope too much, but my heart didn't listen. I kept reading, my voice louder, as if I could pull her out of the darkness with sound alone. Every day I checked my phone, waiting for a message from my family, a sign they cared, but all I got were more photos from Florida. My father posted a video of himself fishing, laughing loudly as he reeled in a tiny fish. My mother shared a picture of herself lounging on a sunbed, captioned, "Life is for living." Talia posted a series of photos of her and her friends dancing in a beachside bar, neon lights making her face glow. I didn't understand. I didn't understand how they could live as if nothing had happened, as if Grandma wasn't the heart of this family. One evening, as I sat by her side, my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. I answered, hoping she'd say something to make me feel less alone, but her voice was as carefree as ever. "Ezra, how's Grandma doing? I just had the most amazing lobster dinner. I'll send you pictures tomorrow, okay?" I bit my lip, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, she still hasn't woken up. Are you coming back? I need you here." "Oh, Ezra, I'd love to, but flights are so expensive right now, and we've already paid for the whole week here. You'll manage, I know you can." I didn't respond. I hung up, feeling like a black hole was swallowing me. I looked at my grandmother, her face still serene, unaware of the callous words of her son and daughter-in-law. I wondered what she'd think if she knew. She, who spent her life loving this family, keeping everyone together, was now abandoned like this. I started talking to her more, not just reading. I told her about my dreams, about the days I wanted to quit being a lawyer because the pressure was too much, about the nights I lay awake wondering if I was living right. I told her about the last time we talked, when she called me from Savannah, her voice cheerful as she said she'd baked a fresh batch of cookies and would send me some. I'd promised to visit, but work swept me away and I hadn't kept my word. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I should have come sooner." A week passed, then 10 days. I stopped counting time. I only counted her breaths, the beeps of the heart monitor, as if each sound was a promise that she was still here, still fighting. I became a shadow in this ICU room, a 33-year-old man in a wrinkled suit with stubble sprouting unevenly on my chin and dark circles under my eyes like two deep pits. The smell of antiseptic clung to every breath. My shirt reeked of coffee and sweat, but I didn't care. Each day I just sat there, holding her hand, waiting for the smallest sign that she would come back to me. Sarah called from Chicago one afternoon when faint sunlight slipped through the window blinds, casting a glow on my grandmother's pale face. Her voice over the phone was filled with worry, a stark contrast to her usual tough demeanor at the office. "Ezra, are you okay? I'm really worried about you. How's your grandmother? Any updates?" I looked at my grandmother, her frail hand still motionless in mine, and answered, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "She hasn't woken up, Sarah, but the doctors say her condition is stable. I just have to wait." I paused, not wanting to say more because every word felt like it was rubbing salt into the fear in my heart. Sarah sighed on the other end. "I understand. Stay there with her, don't worry about anything else. But Ezra, I have to tell you something." She hesitated, and I knew immediately something was wrong. "The boss assigned another lawyer to take over your case. His name's James, just transferred from New York. I know how much work you put into this case, Ezra. All those sleepless nights, the notes, the strategies you built. Now James will be the one standing in court. I'm sorry, I tried to convince the boss, but he said we couldn't wait any longer." A sharp pang shot through me. The case, the thing that had been the center of my life just weeks ago, the reason I stayed up until 3 in the morning poring over every line of a contract, now belonged to someone else. James, a stranger's face, would step up to the podium and claim the spotlight that should have been mine. But strangely, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel regret. I only saw my grandmother lying there, fragile, and I knew I had made the right choice. "Thanks for letting me know, Sarah," I replied, my voice oddly calm. "But I don't care. I just need to know when my grandmother will get better. That's all that matters now." The days that followed stretched on endlessly. I grew accustomed to the rhythm of St. Mary's Hospital, the sound of nurses' footsteps, the low murmurs of doctors in the hallway, the cold fluorescent light casting a glow on the white walls. I dozed off in the chair, waking with a stiff neck and stinging eyes. I kept reading to my grandmother, though my voice grew hoarse from talking so much. I told her old stories about summer afternoons in Savannah when she taught me how to make cookies, about the time I spilled an entire tray of batter on the floor and she just laughed, saying, "Ezra, you've turned my world upside down, but I still love you." I smiled at the memory, but the smile quickly faded as I looked at her motionless face. "Grandma, please wake up," I whispered. "I need you." 14 days after I arrived in Savannah, early one morning as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window blinds, a miracle happened. I was reading the part where Huck and Jim part ways on the Mississippi River, my voice trembling with exhaustion. Suddenly, I felt a slight pressure on my hand. I stopped reading, my heart pounding, and looked down. My grandmother's fingers were gripping mine, weak but unmistakable, like a signal from a distant place. I looked up and my heart seemed to stop as I saw her eyes, those kind, deep eyes I thought I'd never see again. Opening, hazy, but alive. She looked at me, her gaze faint but conscious, and I knew instantly. She recognized me. "Grandma," I choked out, tears spilling uncontrollably. I leaned down, pressing my forehead to her hand, feeling the warmth slowly returning. "You're awake. It's me, Ezra." She couldn't speak, but she squeezed my hand tighter, a single tear rolling down her wrinkled cheek. I saw in her eyes a mix of joy and pain, as if she wanted to say something, but her body wouldn't allow it. I called for the nurse, and the room quickly became a flurry of activity. They checked her vitals, adjusted machines, and Dr. Levine arrived, offering a rare smile. "This is a good sign, Mr. Kane," he said. "She's made it through the most critical phase, but it'll take time for her to recover. She won't be able to speak or move much yet." I nodded, my eyes never leaving her. "Thank you, doctor," I said, but inside I wanted to shout with joy. She was awake. She was still here with me. I sat back by her bed, holding her hand, and for the first time in 2 weeks I felt a real spark of hope. I didn't care that she couldn't speak yet, couldn't walk yet. As long as she was looking at me, as long as she was still here, that was enough. I picked up my phone and called my father. I wanted to share this joy, wanted to believe they'd care, that they'd jump on a plane to be with her. I called my mother, and the phone rang a few times before she answered, her voice as carefree as if she were at a party. "Ezra, what's up?" "We're just getting ready for dinner." "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandma's awake. She opened her eyes this morning and recognized me. Mom, can you and Dad come? She needs family." There was a long silence. Then she replied, her tone so casual it chilled me. "Oh, that's great. So she's okay now, right? We'll be back this weekend and stop by to see her. Thanks for being there, Ezra." I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't want to hear any more of their heartless words. I looked at my grandmother, her eyes still fixed on me, weak but full of love. I wondered if she knew that her son, her daughter-in-law, and her granddaughter were in Florida, treating a visit to her like something that could be postponed. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm here. I won't leave you alone." In the days that followed, her condition slowly improved. She started saying a few words, her voice weak and halting, but each word was a victory. "Ezra," she called my name one afternoon, and I cried like a child. I helped her sip water, assisted the nurses when they did gentle physical therapy to help her move her limbs. She was still weak, still bedridden, but her eyes grew brighter each day, as if she were finding her way back to me. 2 weeks later, Dr. Levine announced she could be discharged. "She'll need special care at home," he said. "She can't walk yet, so she'll need a wheelchair. But her spirit is strong, and that's the most important thing." I nodded, a wave of relief mixed with an unnamed unease. I had called my parents and Talia again, telling them she was going home. Their responses were lukewarm, promising to visit her soon without a trace of emotion. Their promises sounded hollow, like something a colleague might say, not family bound by blood. The day my grandmother was discharged, I wheeled her out of St. Mary's Hospital, the gentle Savannah sunlight bathing her silver hair. She took a deep breath, as if trying to swallow the air of freedom after days confined in the ICU. I smiled, feeling like I had just climbed a mountain. "Grandma, let's go home," I said, my voice cheerful, though there was still an emptiness inside me. I didn't know why, but I felt something was wrong, as if this joy was only temporary, like sunlight before a storm. I rented a specialized van to take her back to her old house, the house where she had lived her entire life, filled with memories of me and her. I imagined her sitting in her familiar armchair, looking out at the small garden she used to tend, where she taught me how to plant marigolds. I pictured myself brewing tea for her, as she once did for me, and we'd talk and laugh as if these harrowing days had never happened. But when the van pulled up to the gate, my bad feeling turned into reality. The familiar iron gate still stood there, but something was off. A strange silver car was parked in the driveway, and the window curtains, ones my grandmother always pulled open to let in Savannah's gentle sunlight, were now drawn tightly shut, as if the house were hiding something. I pushed her wheelchair down the stone path, my heart pounding, a sense of unease creeping in like the chill of early morning. I knocked on the door, forcing a smile to keep my grandmother from noticing my anxiety. But when the door opened, everything I knew about this house, about this family, crumbled. A young woman with blonde hair tied up high, wearing a simple white t-shirt, stood at the door. She looked at me, then at my grandmother in the wheelchair, her eyes a mix of surprise and confusion. "I'm sorry, who are you?" she asked, her voice polite but cautious. I froze, as if someone had doused me with cold water. "I'm Ezra Kane," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my grandmother, Joanne Kane. This is her house." Who are you?" The woman frowned, turning back inside to call someone. A man about my age stepped out, holding a coffee mug, looking at us with equal confusion. "We're the new owners," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if explaining something obvious. "We bought this house a week ago, all legal. You must have the wrong place." His words hit me like a knife to the heart. I felt the blood drain from my face, my breathing heavy. I looked down at my grandmother and my heart shattered. She sat in her wheelchair, her eyes hazy but filled with bewilderment, her frail hands trembling as they gripped the armrests. "Ezra," she whispered, her voice so faint I had to lean down to hear. My house." I knelt beside her, taking her hand, trying to hide the rage building in my chest. "Grandma, I'll handle this," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound strong. I turned to the man, clenching my fist to restrain myself. "Who sold this house? Who signed the contract?" I asked, my voice sharp and cold. The man went inside, retrieved a stack of papers from a drawer, and handed them to me with a look of sympathy. "Martin Kane," he said. "He said it was his property with full power of attorney. Everything's legal. We checked thoroughly with our lawyer." Martin Kane, my father. His name rang in my head like a death knell. I felt the ground beneath me collapse, as if the entire world my grandmother and I once knew had been torn apart. My grandmother trembled, her hand gripping mine tightly, her eyes empty as if all the life had been drained from her. The blonde woman at the door looked at us with apologetic eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "We didn't know. If there's anything we can do, just let us know." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just wanted to get my grandmother out of there, away from the place that was once her home but now only a wound. I drove to a nearby hotel, booking a room with an elevator and doors wide enough for her wheelchair. When I settled her into bed, she didn't speak, only stared out the window, her eyes lost. I sat beside her, holding her hand, but inside me was a storm. My father, the man I called Dad, had sold my grandmother's house, the house that held my childhood, her entire life, while she lay in a coma fighting to survive. I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't accept it. I picked up my phone and called my father. It rang for a long time, and when he answered, his voice was as carefree as if he were still enjoying his Florida vacation. "Ezra, what's up? Is Grandma okay?" "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "What did you do? While Grandma was in the ICU, you sold her house? Do you know she just got discharged and now she has nowhere to go?" Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then he replied, his tone so nonchalant it chilled me. "Ezra, calm down. She signed a power of attorney for me. The sale was legal, that house was old, no one was going to live there. I did it for the good of the family." "For the good of the family?" I snapped, forgetting my grandmother was right beside me. "Dad, she just woke up from a stroke. She needs that house, her memories. How could you sell it without asking anyone? Without asking her, without asking me?" "Ezra, don't make a big deal out of this," he interrupted, his voice growing irritable. "She's old, she doesn't need that house anymore. I've handled everything, and the money from the sale is saved for her care later. You're there, aren't you? Take care of her and stop making trouble." With that, he hung up. I stood there, gripping the phone so tightly I thought I might crush it. I looked at my grandmother, still silent, her eyes fixed on the window. But I knew she heard everything. A tear rolled down her cheek, and I felt like my heart was being torn apart. I knelt down, hugged her, and whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know." But I'll make this right. I'll get justice for you." She didn't speak, only held my hand tightly, so tightly I could feel the pain in her heart. I knew she wasn't just hurting because she lost her house, but because of the betrayal. Her son, whom she loved and raised, had sold everything she cherished while she was at her weakest. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't let my father get away with this so easily. I took action that very night. After my grandmother fell asleep, I sat at the small table in the hotel room, opened my laptop, and reviewed the papers the couple had given me. The house sale contract was tightly drafted, bearing my father's signature and that of a notary. Attached was the power of attorney, POA, with my grandmother's signature from 3 years ago. I read every line, every clause with a lawyer's eye. Everything appeared legal, but something felt wrong. I remembered my father telling my grandmother that the POA was for handling her health care, a simple document to help with administrative tasks. But this wasn't a healthcare POA. It was a comprehensive POA granting him control over all her assets, including the right to sell her house. My blood boiled. My father had deceived her. He had exploited his own mother's trust to take her house. No, her entire life. I couldn't sit still. I called the family's old law firm in Savannah, the one that had handled my grandmother's paperwork in the past. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning, determined to find out what had really happened. I needed the original documents, the evidence, every detail to understand why and how my father could do this. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at Savannah's quiet streets, the dim streetlights flickering as if trying to soothe the anger inside me. I thought about my grandmother, about the years she spent building that house, not just with money but with love, with afternoons planting flowers, with nights telling me stories. That house wasn't just wood and brick, it was her soul, and my father had sold it as if it meant nothing. The next morning I took my grandmother to a daycare center so she could be cared for while I met with the lawyer. She remained silent, only nodding when I said I'd come back to pick her up. Her eyes broke my heart, no longer the kind eyes of the past, but the eyes of someone who had lost what mattered most. I kissed her forehead, promising, "I'll make everything right, Grandma." At the law firm, I met with Helen, an older woman who had worked with our family since I was a child. She looked at me with sympathetic eyes as if she had already guessed part of the story. "Ezra, I'm so sorry about Joanne," she said. "I heard about her stroke, but the house, I don't know how to explain it." "Helen, please," I interrupted, my voice urgent. "I need to know everything. My father sold my grandmother's house, saying he had a power of attorney. I need to see the original. I need to know what he did." Helen sighed, pulling a file from a locked cabinet. "This is a copy of the power of attorney Joanne signed 3 years ago," she said, sliding the papers toward me. "Martin told her it was for health care to handle hospital paperwork on her behalf. But this is a comprehensive POA giving him control over all her assets. I warned Joanne it was very broad, but she trusted Martin. She said, 'He's my son. He wouldn't do anything wrong.'" I scanned the documents, my heart pounding. My grandmother's signature was there, shaky but clear. She had signed because she trusted her son. She had handed her entire life to him, and he had used it to betray her. "What about the sale contract?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "How did he sell it so quickly?" Helen showed me the contract. The house was sold for $380,000 below market value, as if my father wanted to offload it quickly. The contract was signed exactly 1 week after my grandmother was admitted to the ICU. I felt like I was being choked. My father had acted behind everyone's back without telling anyone, without consulting anyone. "Ezra," Helen said, her voice softening, "I don't know why Martin did this, but I can help you look into the legal aspects. If you want to pursue a lawsuit, it'll be complicated because the POA is valid, but Martin's actions, selling the house while his mother was in a coma, could be considered an abuse of power. Do you want to move forward?" I nodded without hesitation. "I do. I won't let my grandmother lose everything like this." As I left the office, I felt a new resolve. I wasn't just Ezra, the grandson. I was Ezra, the lawyer, and I would use every ounce of my knowledge and skills to seek justice for her. I returned to the hotel that evening, carrying the file from Helen's office. The dim light of the desk lamp illuminated the pages, and I sat there reading and rereading the house sale contract, the power of attorney, and every related document. Each line was a stab, a reminder of my father's betrayal. I called Helen, asking her to provide more information about the account that received the sale proceeds. After a few hours of research, she sent me an email with bank details. The entire $380,000 had been transferred to a personal account in my father's name. Not a single cent had gone to my grandmother's account or any family trust. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My father hadn't just sold the house. He had kept all the money for himself. I sat frozen, staring at the laptop screen, feeling the blood in my veins boil. I remembered the times my father scolded me for being too serious about work, the times he laughed when I said I wanted to become a lawyer to uphold justice. He always told me, "Life isn't a courtroom, Ezra. You need to learn to live easy." Now I understood what his living easy meant, betraying his own mother, taking everything she had and vacationing in Florida as if nothing was wrong. I slammed the laptop shut, stood up, and paced the hotel room, trying to organize my thoughts. I couldn't let emotions take over. I needed a plan. The next morning, I began drafting a demand letter, a formal request addressed to my father. As a lawyer, I knew this was the first step before taking the matter to court. In the letter, I demanded that he return the full $380,000 from the house sale and provide all documents related to the transaction. I wrote clearly, sharply, but kept a professional tone, though inside I wanted to scream in his face. I stated that if he didn't comply within 10 days, I would file a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty and abuse of power of attorney. I sent the letter via email and a printed copy through the mail, ensuring he couldn't claim he hadn't received it. I didn't expect an immediate response, but just a few hours later, my phone buzzed. My father's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and answered. His voice came through, no longer carefree as in previous calls, but filled with anger. "Ezra, what the hell are you doing?" he growled. "A demand letter? A lawsuit? You dare sue me over a house? You're a traitor." I gripped the phone tightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I don't want to sue. I just want you to do the right thing. You sold Grandma's house, took her money while she was lying in the ICU. You think that's right? You don't understand anything," he snapped, his voice a low growl. "I did it for the family's sake. That house was old, no one was living there. I kept the money to take care of her later. You think I stole it? You dare question your own father?" I felt like I was being choked. "Dad, if you really wanted to take care of her, why weren't you at the hospital when she was unconscious? Why didn't you tell me, tell anyone before selling the house? You transferred the money to your personal account. You call that taking care of the family?" "Enough," he shouted. "If you want to sue, go ahead and sue. But don't call me Dad anymore. You're no longer my son." Then he hung up. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling like the world had collapsed again. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who hugged me when I fell, had just said I was no longer his son. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I just sat down, staring out the hotel window. Savannah's streetlights flickered, but I felt colder than ever. I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing it for my grandmother, for the woman who gave me the world when I was a child, and now I had to give her back a piece of that world. I decided not to wait any longer. I contacted Helen, asking her to prepare the paperwork for a formal lawsuit. I drafted a complaint, accusing my father of breaching his fiduciary duty and abusing the power of attorney to misappropriate assets. As a lawyer, I knew this case wouldn't be simple. The POA was legally valid, and to win, I needed to prove that he acted with malicious intent, exploiting my grandmother's incapacity for personal gain. I needed evidence, from bank transaction records to Helen's testimony and any witnesses involved in the POA signing 3 years ago. I spent the next day at Helen's office, reviewing every detail. She found a witness, a notary public who had been present when my grandmother signed the POA. The notary, Mr. Thomas, agreed to testify that my father had rushed my grandmother to sign quickly without fully explaining the document's contents. "Joanne looked tired that day," Thomas said over the phone. I asked if she was sure, but Martin said she understood everything. I didn't think much of it since he was her son. Thomas's words were a crucial piece of the puzzle. It wasn't enough to void the POA, but it was enough to raise questions about my father's intent. I also found emails between my father and the real estate company where he urged them to expedite the sale and accepted a lower price to close quickly. Each piece of evidence was another stab. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Meanwhile, I still spent time with my grandmother. I took her for walks in the park near the hotel, pushing her wheelchair along tree-lined paths where oak leaves littered the ground. She started speaking more, though her voice was still weak. One time she held my hand and said, "Ezra, you don't have to make a big deal out of this. I don't want the family to fall apart." I knelt down, looking into her eyes. "Grandma, I don't want the family to fall apart either. But I can't let Dad hurt you like this. I have to do what's right." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I trust you," she said, and that was all I needed to keep going. I worked tirelessly preparing the case, contacting witnesses and building arguments. I knew this lawsuit wouldn't just be a legal battle, but a family war. I braced myself for it, but I couldn't deny the pain of knowing I'd have to face my parents and Talia in court. I didn't want them to hate me, but I couldn't let my grandmother suffer injustice. I wrote a short letter to my mother and Talia, explaining what I was doing and why I had to do it. I hoped they'd understand, though deep down I knew the chances were slim. They didn't respond. A week before filing the lawsuit, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a local reporter named Rachel saying she'd heard about an elderly woman whose house was sold by her son while she was in the hospital. She wanted to interview me. I declined, not wanting to turn our family matter into news. But Rachel published the story anyway based on information from an anonymous source, likely from the law firm. The article appeared in a Savannah newspaper with the headline, "80-year-old woman loses home while in coma. Son accused of misappropriation." I read it, feeling both angry and helpless. I didn't want my grandmother dragged into the public eye, but the story had spread. I filed the lawsuit the next day, officially starting the legal journey. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks later, and I knew I was stepping into a long battle. But I wasn't afraid. I had my grandmother, the truth, and the determination of a lawyer who had sworn to protect the vulnerable. I wouldn't let her lose what she deserved. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and sleepless nights. I slipped back into my role as a lawyer, but this time everything was different. This wasn't a civil case in Chicago where I fought for money or reputation. This was a battle for my grandmother, for the home that was stolen, for the memories my father had ruthlessly erased. I worked tirelessly preparing every detail for the preliminary hearing. I coordinated with Helen, gathering more evidence from the bank, the notary, and the emails my father sent to the real estate company. Each piece I uncovered strengthened my case. My father had abused the power of attorney, acted with malicious intent, while my grandmother was incapacitated and misappropriated assets for personal gain. But I wasn't always strong. Some nights, as I sat in the hotel room watching my grandmother sleep on the simple bed, I felt a deep ache. I wasn't just suing my father, I was tearing this family apart. My mother and Talia still hadn't responded to my letter, and I heard from an acquaintance that they had returned to Savannah but hadn't contacted me or my grandmother. They chose to side with my father as if I were the traitor. I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if it was worth pushing things this far. But every time I looked into my grandmother's eyes, weak but full of trust, I knew I had no other choice. I took her to physical therapy every day, helping her take small, trembling steps with a walker. Her progress was slow, but each shaky step was a victory. One day, as we sat in the park after a therapy session, she held my hand, her voice hoarse. "Ezra, I don't want you to suffer because of this. If you're tired, stop. I just need you." I shook my head, squeezing her hand. "Grandma, I'm not tired. I'm doing this for you, for what's right. I can't let Dad take what's yours without consequences." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know you'll do it," she said, and I felt a new surge of strength flow through me. I wasn't just fighting for her, but for myself, to prove I wasn't a man who gave up, even when the opponent was my own family. The preliminary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in a small courtroom in downtown Savannah. The courthouse was an old building with dark wooden walls and rigid benches. I stood there in a freshly pressed black suit, but inside I was trembling. I wasn't just the lawyer representing my grandmother. I was her grandson, carrying her pain and hopes on my shoulders. My father sat across the room in a gray suit, his cold gaze avoiding mine. My mother and Talia sat behind him, their faces tense, but neither spoke to me. I felt like a stranger in my own family. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes named Margaret Holt, presided over the hearing. I presented my case, my voice clear but heavy with emotion. I told the story of my grandmother, of the house that held her entire life, of how she signed the power of attorney trusting her son, and how my father exploited that trust to sell her home while she lay in the ICU. I submitted evidence: the house sale contract at an unusually low price, the bank account that received the $380,000, and the emails my father sent to expedite the transaction. I called Mr. Thomas, the notary, as a witness. He confirmed that my father had rushed my grandmother to sign the POA without fully explaining it, and that she appeared tired and not entirely aware of the document's contents. My father's lawyer, a tall man named Daniel, argued that the POA was legally valid and that my father had full authority to act as he saw fit. He claimed my father sold the house to protect Joanne's financial interests, arguing that the old house required maintenance and that the sale was to ensure funds for her future medical care. I wanted to jump up and shout that it was a lie, that the money had never been used for her and was sitting in my father's personal account. But I restrained myself, focusing on strategy. I emphasized that selling the house while my grandmother was incapacitated was an abuse of power, a breach of the fiduciary duty a person with POA is bound to uphold. The hearing lasted 3 hours, and when it ended, Judge Holt requested more time to review the evidence. "We will issue a final ruling in 2 weeks," she said, her voice stern. I left the courtroom feeling both relieved and tense. I had done everything I could, but the outcome was still uncertain. The POA was a powerful document, and the law might side with my father if we couldn't prove malicious intent. As I stepped outside, my mother and Talia passed by me. My mother paused, looking at me with pained eyes. "Ezra, why did you have to make this a big deal? You're destroying this family," she said, her voice trembling. I looked into her eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I'm not destroying the family. I'm protecting Grandma. If you think that's wrong, I don't know what to say." Talia, standing beside her, shook her head. "You're so selfish, Ezra. You just want to prove you're right." Then they turned away, not looking back. My father didn't say a word, just walked straight to his car, his back rigid, as if he had nothing to be ashamed of. I returned to the hotel and hugged my grandmother tightly. She didn't ask much about the hearing, only held my hand and said, "You did well, Ezra." I smiled, but my heart was heavy. I didn't want her to see my pain, didn't want her to know that the family had turned their backs on me. But she knew. She always knew. 2 weeks later, the day of the ruling arrived. I wheeled my grandmother into the courtroom, my heart pounding. She held my hand, her gaze steady despite her frail body. My father, mother, and Talia sat across the room, their eyes cold and distant. Judge Holt entered, and the room fell into a tense silence. Judge Holt began reading the ruling, her voice steady but clear. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, the court finds that the power of attorney signed by Joanne Kane is legally valid. However, Martin Kane's actions, Selling the property while Joanne was incapacitated and without notifying relevant parties constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. Transferring the entire $380,000 to his personal account with no evidence of its use for Joanne's benefit is an abuse of power. My heart skipped a beat. My grandmother squeezed my hand, and I looked at her, seeing her eyes light up. The judge continued, "The court orders Martin Kane to repay the full $380,000 plus interest and the difference due to selling the house below market value. All funds must be transferred back to Joanne Kane within 30 days. The current power of attorney will also be revoked to prevent further abuse." I wanted to shout with joy, but I only hugged my grandmother, tears streaming down my face. "We won, Grandma," I whispered. She nodded, a faint smile spreading across her lips. But my joy wasn't complete. I looked at my father, mother, and Talia. They sat there, their faces blank, not saying a word. When the hearing ended, they stood and left the courtroom without so much as a glance at my grandmother or me. Their empty looks chilled me. They hadn't just lost the case, they had lost something far more precious: my grandmother's trust and love. I wheeled my grandmother out of the courthouse, the warm Savannah sunlight enveloping us. I knew the journey wasn't over. The money would be returned, but the house was gone, and the wounds in this family might never heal. But when I looked at my grandmother, seeing her eyes shine for the first time in weeks, I knew I had done the right thing. "Let's go, Grandma," I said softly. "We'll find a new home." The days following the trial passed in a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Judge Holt's ruling was a victory, but it didn't bring back my grandmother's old house. The $380,000, along with interest, was transferred to my grandmother's account on time, thanks to the court's close oversight. But money couldn't buy back the memories, the afternoons she taught me to plant marigolds, the summer nights sitting on the porch listening to her stories about old sailing ships. That house wasn't just wood and brick, it was her soul, the place where I found solace when the world turned its back on me. I knew she felt the loss too, though she never spoke of it. I began searching for a new home in the outskirts of Savannah, where the air was fresh and tree-lined streets reminded me of quieter days. After a few days of looking, I found a small, single-story house with a spacious front yard and a simple white picket fence. It wasn't as grand as the old house, but it was newer and had a small garden in the back, where I imagined my grandmother could sit and read or water plants as she used to do. On the day we moved in, I wheeled her through the freshly painted wooden door. She looked around, her eyes scanning the pristine white walls and large windows that let in the sunlight. I was nervous, afraid she'd compare this place to the old house, afraid she'd feel something was missing. But she took my hand and gave a faint smile. "It's beautiful, Ezra," she said, her voice hoarse but sincere. "You've done well." A lump rose in my throat. "Grandma, it's not like the old house, but I'll do everything to make it feel like home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her eyes brightening slightly. "A house isn't walls or a roof, Ezra. A house is where you are." Her words were like an invisible hug, soothing the ache inside me. I began setting up the house, placing her favorite armchair by the window, hanging old photos I found in her suitcase, family pictures from when I was young, when things were simpler, when my father hadn't yet become the man I no longer recognized. In one photo, my grandmother and I stood under the big oak tree in the old house's yard, me about 8 years old, grinning with dirt-smeared hands. She held that photo, gently stroking it, and I saw her eyes well up. "I miss that oak tree," she whispered. I said nothing, just hugged her, silently promising myself to bring her moments of peace like those again. I installed a small swing under the tree in the backyard, like the one she had at the old house. Every afternoon I brewed tea, her favorite peppermint, and we sat together listening to the birds chirping and the leaves rustling. She started talking more, sharing old stories, sometimes chuckling softly as she recalled the days I spilled cookie trays or got stuck in a tree. Those moments were healing. not just for her, but for me too. I realized that despite losing the old house, we still had each other, and that was what mattered most. But not everything was easy. She was still weak, needing weekly physical therapy, and some days she was exhausted, her eyes distant again, like when we discovered the old house had been sold. I knew she kept a small photo of the old house in her bedside drawer, a snapshot of the front yard with the oak tree standing tall. She never mentioned it, but I saw her take it out sometimes, her trembling fingers tracing the frame. I didn't dare ask, afraid of reopening the wound, but I silently vowed to make this new house a place she could love, the way she loved the old one. I also had to face the aftermath of the lawsuit. The story of the elderly woman whose house was sold by her son was still buzzing in Savannah. Rachel's article, the local reporter, had spread across social media, and I received messages from acquaintances and even strangers expressing support for my grandmother and condemning my father. Some called him a property vulture, a term I didn't want to hear, though I knew it wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't respond to those messages. I didn't want my grandmother dragged further into the public eye, and I didn't want to be swept up in the crowd's outrage. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants in the garden, my grandmother called me from the window. "Ezra, come in here with me," her voice gentle but firm. I wiped my hands and walked inside, finding her sitting in her armchair, holding a small notebook. "I want to talk to you about something," she said, her eyes serious. I sat across from her, feeling a twinge of anxiety. "What is it, Grandma?" I asked. She opened the notebook, revealing her familiar shaky handwriting. "I've rewritten my will," she said slowly. "I'm leaving everything to you, this house, the remaining money, everything I have. You're the only one I trust." I was stunned, unsure of what to say. "Grandma, you don't have to do this. I just want you to be healthy and happy." She shook her head, smiling. "I know you don't need it, but I want to. You stood up for me when the world turned its back. That's something I'll never forget." I bowed my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't want to think about a will, about a day when she wouldn't be here. But I understood this was her way of showing love, her way of saying I was her true family. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, holding her hand. "But I just need you here with me." She smiled, the first full smile I'd seen since she woke up. "I'm here, Ezra, and I'll be here as long as I can." The months that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. The small house in the outskirts of Savannah became the place where my grandmother and I rebuilt our simple routines. I woke up early, brewed tea for her, and wheeled her out to the front yard where she could water plants or read under the sunlight. She grew stronger each day, managing a few steps with her walker, her voice becoming clearer. Every small step forward was a quiet joy, like the marigolds beginning to bloom in the garden. But deep down, I knew she still carried the wound of my father's betrayal. One day, while checking my emails, I found a letter from Helen. She informed me that my grandmother had quietly contacted her to sever all legal ties with my father. My grandmother had written an official document declaring that she no longer considered Martin Kane her legal representative or heir. "It's as if I don't have that son anymore," she had told Helen, her voice resolute despite the pain. I read the letter, feeling both proud and heartbroken. My grandmother, though physically frail, was stronger than anyone I had ever known. I didn't ask her about the decision. I knew she didn't want to dwell on it. But one day, while I was watering the garden, my mother and Talia appeared at the gate. They carried a gift box, their eyes awkward and hesitant. "Ezra," my mother said softly, "Talia and I want to visit Grandma. We're sorry for everything." Talia nodded, her gaze lowered. "We were wrong, Ezra. We want to make things right, to have Grandma forgive us." I looked at them, a mix of anger and exhaustion swirling inside me. I led them into the house where my grandmother was sitting and reading. She looked at them, her expression calm but devoid of the warmth she once had. My mother and sister offered apologies, calling everything a misunderstanding. but my grandmother only shook her head. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm awake." I stood by her side, feeling a quiet strength emanating from her. "Mom, Talia," I said firmly, "we're okay now. My family, right now, is just the two of us." They left without another word. I knew they were hurt, but I had no regrets. My grandmother had chosen me, and I had chosen her. A year has passed since that day, and our lives have settled into the small house in the outskirts of Savannah. Each morning, I wake up early, brew peppermint tea for my grandmother, and wheel her out to the front yard, where we plant white marigolds together, the flowers she's loved since I was a child. She can walk more now, though she still needs her walker or my arm for support. Each of her slow steps is a triumph, and I'm always there, smiling encouragingly, just as she did when I was learning to ride a bike. "Take it slow, Grandma," I say, half joking, half worried whenever she tries to move faster. She laughs, her smile as bright as Savannah's sunlight. As for work, I've started working remotely for a law firm in Savannah, taking on smaller cases free from the pressure of Chicago. I no longer need the spotlight of multi-million-dollar lawsuits. All I need are the afternoons brewing tea for my grandmother, listening to her stories, or sitting with her on the swing, watching the sunset paint the garden gold. Those moments, simple but complete, are everything I've ever wanted. I sit here in the fading light of a Savannah evening, watching my grandmother gently water the marigolds in our small garden. The soft trickle of water from her watering can blends with the chirping of birds, creating a peaceful melody I never appreciated so deeply before. This small house, though not the old one filled with memories, has become the place where we rebuild our lives, day by day, moment by moment. Looking back on the journey, from the phone call about her stroke, the days by her hospital bedside, the shock of learning the house was sold, to the painful legal battle, I realize life has taught me harsh but invaluable lessons, ones I will carry with me forever. I once thought family was a place you could rely on without question, that blood ties would always bind us. I was wrong. Family isn't just those you're born with. It's those who choose to stand by you, to love you, even when things get tough. When you face betrayal from those closest to you, remember that family isn't defined by titles but by actions. Cherish those who are truly there for you, and don't be afraid to let go of those who don't deserve your love. My advice, if you'll allow me to share, is to live true to your heart. Don't let others' expectations or societal pressures make you forget what truly matters. For me, that's my grandmother, the woman who gave me the world and for whom I've given my world to protect. Find your own grandma, a person, a purpose, or a value you're willing to fight for. And when you find it, hold on to it, love it, and don't let anyone or anything take it away. Life will have its stormy days, but if you have an anchor, you'll make it through. Finally, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to you, those who have listened to my grandmothers and my story. You've given me the chance to share this, not just to recount the pain, but to honor my grandmother's love and resilience. The woman who taught me that family isn't something you're born with, but something you choose to build. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being here, for listening, and for reminding me that our story matters. I hope, somewhere in these words, you find a little light for yourself.